Oh, that's recording. Hello and welcome. I'll just wait for folks to log in. I'll give another minute, folks, to get in, and we'll just go ahead and get started. Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Debbie Ivazos. I work for the city of Redwood City and their water resources program. I manage the water conservation programs here, and among some other things, recycled water and such. And even though it says Kyle Rainey as my name here, that's not it. If I was more computer savvy, I might be able to figure out how to change my name here, but that is the Bosca, the person's account that I'm using for Bosca. So, and this evening we're going to, Redwood City's hosting this webinar for Bosca. And we've got Chris Corvetti, and hopefully I pronounced her name correctly, as our instructor. We're going to talk about rainwater harvesting and rain barrels and rain gardens. So welcome, everyone. Chris, would you mind? Okay, so everybody is muted by default, and then the instructor will pause periodically for questions. Audience questions are encouraged. You can ask in two ways: by raising your hand, and then the moderator, which is me, will unmute you to ask, and then you can ask your question, and you can also use the Q&A. So about Bosca, Bosca represents 26 water agencies. That includes cities, water districts, water companies, and a university that purchases wholesale water from San Francisco Regional Water System. The Bosca member agencies provide 1.8 million people with over 40,000, with water, and over 40,000 businesses and communities, organizations in Alameda, Santa Clara, and San Mateo counties. Bosca's goal is high quality supply of water at a fair price. And Redwood City is among one of the water agencies that participates in Bosca organization. So the objective of these presentations, these workshops, is to save water outdoors. You know, we've been doing a good job for many years saving water indoors. Most folks have that under control, but the outdoors is another beast. So outdoor water use represents the single largest untapped opportunity for water conservation in the Bosca service area. Outdoor water use reduction through the use of water efficient plants and innovative techniques can help conserve water and ensure that the future water supply needs for our communities are met. And we do that by help our residents by offering programs, rebates and such. One of them being Lawn Be Gone. Redwood City participates in this program. We offer $2 per square foot to replace your lawn with water efficient plants and convert from spray irrigation to drip irrigation. We also participate in the rain barrel program, the smart controller. Oh, that's okay. You're fine, Chris. The smart controller rebate program which is super easy. It's an instant rebate. Just go on the website, pay for the ratio, and they ship it directly to you. So super fast turnaround. And then there's an optional rain garden rebate program as well that goes along with the Lawn Be Gone program. And all of the information can be found on the Bosco website. So if you want details, that's the best place to go first, and then contact your water agency, because I know not all of you are probably from Redwood City. And then Valley Water also offers support for sustainable landscapes. Looks like they offer a rebate of $1 to $2 per square foot, and there's more information can be found on their website as well. And then other resources are South Bay Green Gardens, watersaving.org, and let's see what else do they have. So I apologize because I'm not familiar with the Valley Water programs, but I know that they do a great job in water conservation and offer their residents quite a few resources and rebates. All right. And I want to remind folks, this presentation was really set up as a two-parter. Hopefully, most of you will attend our October 7th class, which today's presentation will be more of like a 101, rain barrels or rainwater harvesting and rain gardens, like an introduction. And then we'll have more of a hands-on and a how-to on October 7th in-house here at 1400 Broadway in Redwood City. So hopefully you'll attend that as well. And then of course, this is recorded, so you can go back and watch it. And then there's all the other classes that are offered throughout the Bosco service area as well. And lastly, I think this is the last slide. We have our bayareagardening.org. So this is a really wonderful resource to go and see pictures of water efficient gardens and get some great information about the plant material that's used in those gardens and what their water use needs are. And with that, I'll go ahead and pass it over to Chris, and she'll introduce herself. And I am going to mute myself and hand it on over.
Okay, well, thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Chris Corvetti. I'm a rainwater harvesting specialist. I've been working on rainwater harvesting systems in the Bay Area for the last 6 to 7 years, and I've installed numerous ones all over the Bay Area. Many of the photos that are going to be in the presentation today are sites that I have helped with the installation on. So for the most part, I'll be able to answer questions specific to that site as well as about the general design and systems in general. So we're going to talk just talking a little bit about rainwater harvesting, and then we'll move into rain barrels and rain gardens. So there are some different types of rainwater harvesting. When we hear rainwater harvesting, most people immediately think of rain barrels or rain cisterns, but we also want people to think about rain gardens and how important they can be for rainwater harvesting, as well as permeable pavement. So I'm going to just briefly mention permeable pavement before I move on to those other two. Permeable pavement can be achieved in two different ways. You can have pavers built in with spacing to just allow that water to soak into the ground, so we're not getting as much runoff going to the streets, and we don't get as much of a flashiness that's able to carry pollutants into our creeks from that runoff. There's also something called porous cement that can be poured as a slab or purchased as pavers. A lot of our local municipalities, including Redwood City, are moving to these for walkways and walking paths. These aren't as durable for driving on, but often they're used in parking lots for parking spaces or for walking trails. And they're a great way to allow the water to move right through the paver As you can see here in this picture, the water goes straight through the paver and would be able to sink into the ground. It's in the air just for demonstration purposes here. And on the right, you can see a house where someone just took all of their concrete, they broke it up, they left gaps so that the water had somewhere to soak into the ground rather than running down the driveway. So permeable pavers are a great way, especially if you're doing a driveway remodel, to get more of that water into your own property rather than letting it run down onto the street. So I'm talking about all this water, except we live in an area that doesn't traditionally get a lot of water and is in a drought. So is there really enough rain to make it worth all of this? And the short answer, yes, which is why we're all here. But let's do some numbers. I have a degree in math and I love numbers. So 1,000 square foot area can capture over 600 gallons of rainwater from just 1 inch of rain. So again, nice equation here, but let's put some numbers into that equation and see what that does. So this is that equation. We got our roof size, the amount of rain, the conversion factor to get us to that total harvesting potential. So let's talk about our average rainstorm. We're not talking about those crazy rains we got last year where we had 6 and 7 inches at once, but in the Bay Area, an average rain event is about 1/2 inch. So in a 1/2 inch of rain, 1,000 square foot roof can capture about 310 gallons. Now, over the course of the year, Redwood City averages about 20 inches of rain. So what that translates to for a 1,000 square foot roof is over 12,000 gallons of harvesting potential. And I say potential here because you're not going to be able to capture all that. If you have 1,000 square foot roof hooked onto a rain barrel or a rain garden, there's going to be some overflow. There's going to be certain events where there is too much water in the system for you to be able to capture every single drop. But this is your overall potential if you were able to capture every drop. So let's take a look about how we can capture that water. The first way of capturing it is with rain barrels or cisterns, and they allow you to capture your roof runoff and store it for later use. So this is going to eliminate or decrease your need for irrigating with municipal water. It's going to mineralize moisture around your building, which can reduce flooding, sewer overflow, and soil erosion, and just kind of protect your home value a little bit. And it's going to improve the water quality in creeks, like we talked about earlier, because it removes the flashiness of that storm, where that flash of that first heavy storm carries all of that topsoil, all of the pollutants on the street, everything into our creeks. If we can slow that water down, spread it out, and sink it into the ground, that is the best way to reduce that pollution in our creeks from runoff. So by capturing the water in our rain barrel, that is about as slow as you can make that water go. It is stopping. So you're slowing it down. And then when you use it in your garden, you're spreading it out and letting it sink into the ground. So the whole concept of slow it, spread it, and sink it works really well for rain barrels as well as rain gardens, which we'll see later. It's a great educational tool for your neighbors, your kids, to teach about, water saving techniques as well as pollution management. The barrel in this picture is at Gamble Gardens in Palo Alto. They use it to water all of their seedlings in their small greenhouse. It's only 50 gallons, but it gets them through a lot of the dry season. So if you are considering a rain barrel, there are certain things that you want to consider. And one of them is your roof size or your harvesting potential. So you can measure your roof and use that equation we just looked at to see what your harvesting potential is and how many barrels make sense. If you have 1,000 square foot roof, you're probably not going to put a 12,000 gallon capacity on your roof because that's the most it could capture all year. And you want to be able to use these barrels in between storms. So you would use a smaller amount of capacity so that they can fill each storm and be usable between each storm. You want to think about the number of downspouts. how many downspouts does your home have? And how many downspouts are you going to connect to? So are you going to connect your barrels to only one downspout? Or do you want to connect your system to multiple downspouts? Or do you want to install multiple systems on different parts of your house? That also will come in when you're thinking about the rebates, and we'll talk a little bit more about rebates at the end. But when you're thinking about rebates, they are per system. So if you just decide to install 2 separate systems on your house, you are able to do 2 rebates. I believe Bosqua caps the rain barrel rebates at 2 per household right now. So if you did 4, you would still only be able to do 2. You want to think about your installation space. How much room do you have? Do you have the room to put in a large 500-gallon cistern? Or do you only have the room for a 50-gallon tank? Even if you have a large watershed, if you don't have the room for the tank, 50 gallons can get you through quite a bit of the dry season. You want to think about where this is going to go. So you want the system to be close enough to capture your water from your existing downspout, but you also want it to be close enough to where you're going to use the water. So you want to think about how you're going to use that water. And then you also want to think about your drainage or your overflow. So where is the water going to go once your barrels are full? Where's the rest of the water from your downspout going to go? And one of the questions I always ask people is, where does that water go now? Is that water currently an issue, or does it have a safe path to travel now? And if it is currently an issue, then you can use this rain barrel system to rectify that and move the water farther away. If it's not currently an issue, you may be able to run your overflow back into your existing system. And you also want it to be pretty. I mean, you're putting this on your house, so you want to think about how it's going to look. One of the things that I've seen a lot of people do is paint the barrels, like this one pictured here. I have pretty much 0 artistic talent, so that would be far beyond me. But maybe you have a neighbor or a kid in the family who does have that ability, and you could blend the barrel in with your garden. So we're going to take a look at the anatomy of a rain barrel or cistern. Rain barrels and cisterns have pretty much the same anatomy, but the difference is the capacity. A cistern is anything over 200 gallons, whereas a rain barrel is, for our purposes, is between 50 and 200 gallons. Anything under 50 gallons is not considered for the rebate. So you need at least 50 gallons to be considered for the rebate. And to be worth your time for harvesting the water. So at the top here, I'm going to change my pen color since I already have red on the slide. Let's try purple. So at the top, our water is coming in this downspout, and it's coming from a gutter at the top and flowing down that downspout. Then it goes to this leaf eater. That leaf eater is an essential part of the system because it provides screening. So that screen keeps mosquitoes out, it keeps extra leaves and things out of your system, and it keeps your system cleaner in general. So we have screening there, and in this case, it's provided by a leaf eater. For other installations, you can install different types of mesh screening to meet that requirement. Then the water is going to travel down this tube and into the top of the tank. So that's how the water is flowing into the tank. And this is a really cool system where it's daisy chained together. So at this site, we didn't have room to put a 220-gallon cistern, but we did have room to put 4 55-gallon tanks together. So that gives us a 220-gallon capacity. And the way we did this is, as this water flows into the first tank, it will flow all the way down to the bottom, and then it will flow across, filling this pipe on the bottom, and it will flow up into all 4 tanks simultaneously. because water seeks its own level. So by having them all connected at the base, they will all fill at the same time. The one really important thing on that is each of the other tanks that are not open for the water inlet have a vent on them to allow air to escape, so that that water can fill the barrel and come out of the barrel and let air come back in. So there are vents on the top of each of those, and they are connected at the bottom. So that's daisy chaining, which is a great way to increase your capacity without taking up as much space or as much of an expense as a cistern. For our output here, we have two different types of output. At the top, which you can see in this picture in the middle on the right, we have a spigot, and that is set up so that a hose can be attached to water, or it can be used to fill watering cans. And then at the bottom, it's a little bit hard to see in this picture, but there's this big filter sticking out at the very bottom. And then there's a timer just past that. And that filter and timer are part of a drip irrigation system that runs to a rain garden. So anytime you're going to set up a rain garden from a rain barrel, you do want to add a filter so that your drip irrigation doesn't get clogged. And that filter is super easy to clean. It just unscrews, and you can use a baby bottle brush to clean it. And then a drip timer makes the system very low maintenance. You don't have to come out and turn it on. It will run at whatever schedule you set it to. So you can set it not to run during the rainy season or to only run once a week. And it takes a couple AA or AA batteries, and you're set to go for quite a few years. There's one I installed 5 years ago. I haven't changed the batteries yet. And it's still working. The other thing you will notice in this system is the strapping. And it's this white line in the middle, as well as these silver lines on top and middle and bottom. So we've got, it's a little bit hard to see with all these arrows on here now. But that strapping provides stability and earthquake proofing, and just another level of control should kids decide to climb on the or adults, it's usually the adults, decide to climb on the tanks or do anything that could potentially topple the tanks over. These straps will keep them secure. The last thing that I don't have a label on is this nice and sturdy base at the bottom. And that base, you can see, is a wooden frame filled with gravel with cinder blocks on top. So if you are doing a larger system like a cistern, you might want to have a concrete base or a concrete pad to place it on. Some homes already have that around them, so you wouldn't have to pour your own concrete pad. Depending on how much weight you're going to be putting in it. You do want to think about the weight, because, you know, as you get over 200 gallons of water, 265-gallon tank weighs more than 1 ton when it's full, because water's a little more than 8 pounds a gallon. So they do get very heavy. So you want to think about stability. And you also want to think about, you know, if it rains and you know, you have a lot of water going on your base, you really don't want just dirt under there, because that can erode and your barrels could tilt. And you don't want a lot of organic material like mulch underneath your barrels, because the mulch will degrade over time and your barrels will sink and tilt. So you want them to be nice and level and stable. So installing a stable base is very important. So we're going to talk a little bit about maintenance, and pretty low maintenance. Rain barrels are super easy to maintain. You do need to clean your gutters twice a year. You should be doing this anyway, but a lot of people don't. The twice a year is part of the state of California's requirements for having a rain barrel on your home. And that lines up with having the screening on the input and the overflow. this is just to keep your systems a little bit cleaner and to not have much buildup and debris from your gutters going into your tanks. You want to check and empty your leaf feeder and screens at least 4 times a year. You really should do it monthly or after every storm. You want to empty and clean your first flush diverter if you have a first flush diverter twice a year, or ideally after every storm. It's really important that you visually inspect all valves and components at least once a year. This means look them over, make sure there's no obvious cracks or leaks. Every once in a while, we get some cold weather in the areas. I've got a site in Rastradero Preserve in Palo Alto that we got a little bit of frost and my ball valves froze. And since we were checking over that, we caught it pretty quickly and we didn't lose all the water in the system. You want to drain your system about every 5 years. And you want to make sure you flush clean water, rinse out the barrels about every 5 years. Looks like I have a hand up, so I'm going to take some questions before I move on to permitting.
It was just me.
Oh, did you have a question for me?
I did. I just wanted to know, I see you have those valves, I guess they're valves, for the drip system. They don't look like your typical irrigation valves, and I was just wondering if you could expand on them a little bit.
I'm not totally certain I understand your question. So are you talking, I'm gonna clear all of my markings on this page, and then I'm gonna draw again and see if I can identify the valves. Are you talking about these valves here?
No, I'm actually talking about the timer. I apologize. I said valves because
Okay, so
you would have
I
an
got
irrigation valve here.
these ones here.
Uh-huh, correct.
Oh, that was a really good observation, actually, and that is really important. And the same thing with the filter. So both of these, let me clear my ink again so that I'm only talking about one thing. So both of these pieces right here, this filter and that timer, and the timers are also pictured down here, are very specific to rain barrels, and specifically to rain barrels that are not using a pump. So tonight we are kind of going at the high level quick overview of everything, and next Saturday we're going to go a little more in depth the in-person. So folks who want even more clarification, I absolutely recommend coming to that second workshop. But both of these are specifically designed for gravity fed systems that do not have the municipal pressure. So when you install a standard drip irrigation line from your garden hose valve, or from your household municipal water, you're using drip irrigation systems and timers and filters that are designed to be under pressure. And they're designed to have the water pushing against them and pushing out. So they have a little more resistance, and they're designed not to blow out and have your water exploding out all of your lines. When you're installing from a rain barrel without a pump, you are installing lines and timers and filters that are designed to allow the water through without that amount of pressure. Because the only pressure you have in this system is gravity pushing down on your water and the amount of water you have in your tank. So the more water you have in your tank, the more pressure you will get in your system. But as your tank gets lower and lower, you will have less pressure. In fact, for this system, if the water level in my tanks reaches this point across the barrels, you will no longer be able to fill a hose, because my hose valve is slightly above that line, and the water doesn't go uphill. Water travels downhill with gravity. So it doesn't want to go uphill unless there's something pushing it uphill. So with this type of system, for that bottom quarter of the tank, you can no longer fill a watering can. You can only use drip irrigation. You can set your spigot lower We did this intentionally because we didn't want anyone using a watering can to empty the lower quarter of the tank. We wanted to be able to drip irrigate later into the season. So this filter that's here in the black picture is specifically designed to allow the water to go through without a lot of pressure. It would not work in a pressurized system. It cannot handle the municipal pressure. The screen would probably crack. The timer has a valve in it to turn it on and off. That timer is also not going to work as well in a pressurized system. You'd be more likely for the water to be able to push its way through from a pressurized system. So if you were to install this type system on a pressurized line, you would have to put a pressure reducing coupler in front of it. This also leads in, which is really important if you're doing a rain garden. If you're going to run drip irrigation lines from your rain barrels, and if you have a garden that already has existing drip irrigation lines, you're not going to be using the same lines. It's easier and more cost effective to install new drip irrigation lines from your rain barrel over and interacting with your current drip irrigation lines, and then just turn off your municipal system when you're irrigating with your rain barrels. And then when your rain barrels run out for the season, so, you know, you're coming into August, end of August, beginning of September, and you're out of water and you want to switch back over to municipal water, you don't have to switch anything on lines. You just turn off the rain barrels and you turn back on your municipal timer. So it's they can work together in that way, but you're not using the same lines. So hopefully that wasn't too confusing. Did that clarify? Hopefully.
It did. Thank you. I had no idea that there was different components for the rain barrel irrigation. So
Okay.
great.
Great question. Okay, I'm going to move past maintenance because I feel like we covered that pretty well. And I'm going to talk a little bit about permitting. So one of the questions I get most often is, you know, I want to install a rain barrel. This is really intimidating. I don't want to have to apply for a permit. And I always get people very excited and happy when I say, don't worry, you don't need to. You do not need a permit if you are plumbing this fully exterior to your single family home. If you are under 360 gallons per system, or if you're under 5,000 gallons, not connected to electrical, not connected to a makeup water supply, with only drip irrigation. So that's a lot of water. I don't know of any homeowner that's going to put more than a 5,000 gallon system on their house. And I can't imagine wanting to water it with a hose if you're going to have that much of a system anyway. So you'd be putting drip irrigation. 360 gallons is really the number to remember. For most people, that's what you're looking at. If you're someone who really likes to, you know, water your roses by hand, water whatever flowers you have, your native garden by hand, you want to make sure you're under 360 gallons. That does not mean 360 gallons on your home. That means per system. So if you have 4 downspouts on your home, 1 on each corner, and you put 300 gallon systems on each corner of your home and they are not connected to each other at all, those are individual systems, each under 360 gallons, and you can hose water the whole thing. But as soon as you put a pipe connecting 2 of those systems together, you then have a 600 gallon system. So as long as your barrels are fully disconnected from each other, your irrigation is fully disconnected, they are considered separate systems. When you do need a permit is if it doesn't meet the above exemptions. And the biggest ones are if you're doing a below ground system or if you're connecting to any interior plumbing. The main thing there is a lot of people say, I would like to flush my toilet with my rainwater. And that's great that there are companies in the Bay Area that do that. They got a permit for it. You need a permit to do that because you're connecting to municipal water, you're connecting to interior plumbing. So that was when you need a permit. For more details, you can check out the California Plumbing Code, Chapter 16. It has very detailed lists. These are just the bullet points for the general idea that applies to most people. The most important thing to remember if you do install a rain barrel is to use your rainwater. People get very excited about storing their rainwater and they forget to use it. It is not there just to sit in a tank and look pretty. It is there to be used, so use it regularly. If you can empty your barrels between storms, that's great. It sinks that water into the ground and allows you to capture more the next storm, so it's not all going into your storm drain. I got another question.
Sorry, it's more of a comment. You need to have a complete separate system you can't connect your potable system to a rain system.
No.
Yeah.
So that requires a permit. So anytime you're connecting to any other plumbing, it needs to be any other plumbing or any makeup water supply.
Yeah, it's considered a cross connection, and it is absolutely not allowed unless you have a complete separate system feeding that fixture. So
okay,
yeah,
so those are our two big ones. Connecting to makeup water supply or interior plumbing, you need a permit.
Yeah,
and this is not something you're going to be installing your own. You're going to have a contractor doing it. They're going to be applying for the permit. They're going to know what's allowed.
Sorry, water agencies, we get a little nervous about that kind of thing. And
yeah, absolutely. That's under the big yes.
We don't want your rainwater in our distribution system.
Absolutely. And that's why I also stress that if you are setting up a drip irrigation, you are setting it up separate. You are not connecting to your existing system.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, so we do want to use that rainwater as much as possible. You can connect it to a rain garden. You can use it to wash tools outside. You can connect it to a pump. You can just use the gravity fed. Use your drip irrigation for those smaller systems under 360 gallons. You can use a hose or a watering can. And the most important thing is just to sink it into the ground to increase groundwater storage. As we mentioned before, if you want to connect it to a toilet or something, you need a permit, you need a special system. This is not what we're here for tonight. This is not what we will be discussing next week if that's what you're going for. But if you want to be able to irrigate your gardens, we're going to talk more about rain gardens right now, and we'll get more in depth on rain barrels and rain gardens next weekend. So if there's any questions about rain barrels, feel free to ask now or at the end of the presentation, but I'm going to move on to rain gardens. Okay. So rain gardens also capture and filter runoff from impervious surfaces to recharge local groundwater. But they don't have to be capturing that rainwater from your house necessarily. In this picture, Bull Park in Palo Alto, you'll notice this bike path running on the left-hand side of the screen. Before we installed this rain garden, that bike path flooded every time it rained. So the city of Palo Alto reached out to a local nonprofit that I work with and said, we would love to mitigate this flooding. We would love to do something that can help with this. And we said, let's install a rain garden. So the way this rain garden works is we have the water runs off of that bike path and into our garden, and it's grown in really well with natives now, so you can't see it. But we actually dug our rain garden out and made a little area here that kind of widens and flays, and it comes down, and the rain garden is actually dug down about 18 to 24 inches. So you'll see this grate in the bottom of the picture. That grate doesn't capture any water unless this rain garden fills totally, and then it will overflow into that drain. Now, before we did this, we didn't even know there was a drain there because it was so impacted with dirt and covered that it was not functioning, which is why the bike path was flooding, because all the dirt from the hillside above it had been flowing into that drain every rain. So we reinforced that hillside with gravel, and we were able to create this rain garden to help mitigate that flooding. I think I have a question. I'm going to pause there in case it was about barrels.
We do. The question is, if you have two separate cisterns with capacity of about 800 gallons each connected to one another and fed from one single downspout, do you need a permit? My understanding is yes. Am I correct?
So if you want to use that 1,600 gallon capacity with a hose or a watering can, then yes, you need a permit. But if you are only connected to drip irrigation, you're okay because you are under that 5,000 gallon limit. You're at 1,600 gallons. So as long as you are not connected to electrical, so you don't have a pump hardwired in, and you are not connected to a makeup water supply, then you do not need a permit. But as soon as you want to connect to a makeup water supply or to electrical, or you want to water with a hose or with a watering can, then you do need a permit. So that's one of those kind of depends on use. Okay, good question though. That's a great chance to clarify that rule. Okay, so we're gonna head back to Bull Park now. So this rain garden, we actually disconnected all of the irrigation that they had when this was a grassy field. So we completely removed the need for irrigation because we used native plants for this site, and it only gets partial sun, and so the amount of water that gets captured and held in the soil is sufficient all summer with those native plants. The rain garden can help reduce flooding, sewer overflows, erosion, because you're able to direct that water where you want it to go. And all of these things can help increase your property value and enhance the landscape. You're going to be able to soak more water into the ground. You'll get better groundwater recharge and help even your plants a little farther away from your rain garden be a little healthier because you'll have more water in that soil. Again, it's a great educational tool for community members and kids. So let's talk a little bit about what makes a rain garden different than just a garden. You know, how is this different than a garden that just, you know, comes from my downspout and is in my front yard? They're designed, like engineered, to capture, store, and let that rainwater soak into the ground. So that, as I said before, that slow it, spread it, sink it is exactly what these rain gardens are designed for. This one on the left is in Half Moon Bay High School, and we had their AP Environmental Science class help do this installation. So their water comes from their science building. It comes down this pipe. It actually comes underground and then flows back up and into the top of this barrel. And then we have the overflow coming out here, and it's buried again. And then the overflow flows into this rain garden. So as soon as that, I think it's a 250 gallon tank. I don't have it written on the slide. As soon as that tank fills, the rest of the water flows into the garden. Previously, that water drained straight out onto their driveway. And so there would be water flowing down into the parking lot, which wasn't pleasant for the kids walking out to their, or the teachers walking out to their cars, or the kids walking out for to go to the sports fields across that road. So this actually helps mitigate an issue of flooding, and it looks a lot nicer than the weeds that were growing there. We planted a lot of juncus and other natives in those rocks that will do really well with that water. They've also set up a drip irrigation system that is buried coming out of the tank, so it's a little hard to see, but it loops around all of these plants and makes a nice loop to water everything so they can keep those plants healthy all summer long. So compared to a conventional lawn, rain gardens allow 30% more water to soak into the ground. So if you think about, you know, an area of just lawn in front of your house versus a rain garden, you get 30% more water soaking into the ground rather than not being able to soak into the grass and flowing off into the street and into our storm drains where they can carry pollutants into our creeks. So this slows it down and lets more water sink in. Generally with rain gardens, you're actually removing your native soil or you're amending it. So you're adding something else into it. And we're going to look at an anatomy diagram in the next slide to really see, you know, what goes into building a rain garden. And next weekend, when we get a little bit more in detail, we will also take a look at, you know, how to assess your soil, which I can talk a little bit more about if anyone here is interested. Native plants are a great resource for rain gardens because they just need less maintenance than a traditional garden. These are not a pond feature, so they are dry most of the time and they only pond temporarily. So this, when we say rain garden, we're not talking about something that's always filled with water during the rainy season. It should drain out. It should drain out within a day. If it's not draining in 2 days, it was poorly designed and needs to be changed. Because we do not want to create mosquito breeding grounds. We want to be able to use this as a resource to really help that groundwater recharge, to get that water into the ground and not running off. Okay, so we're going to move on and take a look at how we do that. So this picture shows the water flowing in. So it comes off of, you know, sidewalks, driveways, parking lots, or you can connect it to your downspout. So you can have this coming straight from your roof. You can put this at the bottom of a sloped landscape or a hillside. We've had people put them kind of as a bioswale rain garden in ditches where you know it's going to run off from the road, but kind of down a hill and into this. You can also set up a rain garden to run from your rain barrel overflow, like the last two that we looked at, or the last one we looked at, and the picture of the daisy chain barrels we looked at earlier. So in this picture, you can see the ponding in effect during the actual rainstorm. But the idea is that that ponding will not last. It will be able to soak into the ground without staying a pond. And the way we do that when you're building a rain garden is to dig it out. So we're not just going out front and putting some rocks on top of our existing soil and saying, oh, good, the rocks will lead the water the way I want them to. We are digging a trench so that the water has the path of least resistance and the water wants to move where we're digging. So you dig closer to your house, you would dig a little shallower, and then you would get a little bit deeper towards the center of your rain garden. And these can be pretty deep. So at a minimum, you want to have an absolute minimum of 3 inches per level. So our top level here is river rock. Our middle level is the bioswale soil. Oops. Sorry about that. Our middle level is that bioswale soil. And our bottom level is the drainage rock. So with those 3 levels, you want an absolute minimal of 3 inches of each. Now I've heard people say you can do a very effective rain garden by digging it out and just putting the amended soil in without the drainage rock. And for some areas where you have naturally better drainage in your soil, that may work. You may be able to do amended soil, you may be able to do mulch on the top. This is a very traditional setup in this picture. So I'm going to talk about the really traditional one, and then we're going to look a little bit at the rebate requirements and what's required for this area. So I do have a question about amending clay soil, which is not absorbent. So we're gonna talk about that. So with this setup, you're digging out, if you have really clay soil, and next week I'm going to go through how to test your soil very simply. But if you know your soil is very clayey and it doesn't really drain well, you can dig a hole and pour some water in it and see how long it drains and get a pretty good estimate of how long it's going to drain. And the longer it takes to drain naturally, the deeper you're going to want to dig out this rain garden and set up an area for it to be able to drain into. If it doesn't drain at all, you're really not going to be a suitable site for a rain garden. If your soil is pure clay and it's not going to sink in even a little bit, this is probably not your best option. But in this area, I've found if you move 20 feet to the left or right, you might find slightly different soil. So you can check a couple different areas to see what's best suited for it. In this situation, even if you have slightly clayey soil, you're going to dig this out, and at the bottom you're going to install just drainage rock. So this is a crushed gravel that the water can kind of sit in, and there's space for the water in between the gravel, and it'll sit there until it can soak into the soil. But on top of that, you're going to use bioswale soil. So bioswale soil is a very permeable soil. It's a soil that is made to allow the water to sink through. It's usually a mix of sand and compost and soil, and you can even mix sand and compost with your natural soil, as long as it's not too much clay, to be able to create your own bioswale soil for this. On top of that, because that compost and that sand sometimes can float a little bit and you don't want to lose that nice rich bioswale soil, I usually use river rocks. So they hold that soil in place. They're easy to move to do my plantings, and you get a really pretty dry creek bed effect. But some people want to have it just look like part of their natural garden. So you can do that with using mulch on the top. You do want to use a larger, like hardwood mulch, something that's not going to float away as easily, something that's going to help hold that soil in place. All of this will mean that you have extra gaps and open spaces for that water to sit in under the level of your ground, under the level of that top river rock or mulch, and that will give the water more time to soak into the ground rather than just flushing your top layer of soil with it as it runs off your property. You can create a raised berm covered in mulch to help keep the moisture in the soil, as well as to help shape and stabilize the sides of your garden. You can, sorry, reading my notes at the same time. And the main goal is just to be able to capture that water. But like we saw in that picture at Bull Park, if you have a soil where you don't think everything's going to be able to be absorbed in that rain garden, you can set up a secondary system, a drainage grate, or another secondary garden for that first one to drain into. Some people will take perforated pipe and bury it coming up in the center to create a little bit of a drain that goes on their own property a little bit away. And of course, with all these rain barrels and rain gardens, we are draining all this water from our roofs onto our own properties. You know, even if you hate your neighbor, you can't put all your extra rainwater on the property line or over to theirs. So that's going to lead us into our requirements for that rebate. So for the rebate, 10 feet from your home's foundation, right? We don't want that water coming back and undermining your own foundation. You want it, downslope. The water's not gonna run uphill, so you want it slightly downslope from your home. You want to have some sort of erosion protection at the inlet. So river rocks are really great. Again, I like to use them for the whole top of my garden anyway, because it holds everything in place. You need to have at least this is 6 to 12 inches of ponding depth. 6 inches is extremely shallow. So these are the base requirements. Like I said before, you really need at least 3 inches of each layer. We have 3 layers, so I would say the minimum is really 9 inches. And I've done some gardens in slightly clayer soil where we went down 18 to 24 inches, depending on where we were at. So you may want to go down a little bit more. If you have a little bit of a hill, you can create more of a berm at the bottom so that your garden top is, 6 inches from that berm, and kind of create a stop on the downhill slope to be able to give yourself a little more depth without having to do as much digging. Bosqua has an approved plant list for the rebate for native plants. Their plant list is an Excel spreadsheet. So you can download that and then you can sort, because the spreadsheet covers a lot of different qualifications. And there's one tab that says Rain Garden Rebate. And you click on that tab and it'll sort all of the plants that qualify for the rainbow rebate. And you can look through the plants. If you don't know the names, you can go on Google and see if it's pretty, or if you feel that it looks too weedy. Some of the native plants that they recommend do look a little bit weedy. One of the rain gardens I helped install in Palo Alto, we ended up having to come back a year later and pull out all of one of our plants because it took over the entire garden and was killing our other natives. And even though it was an approved native plant, it was not good for our needs. So being able to assess that and choose the plants that you like from that list is a great tool. So the bed should be at least 12 to 24 inches. And they say predominantly flat bottom, but you do want it to slope slightly away from your structure. I've got a little bit of a question here. Oh, we've got someone recommending that spreadsheet. They say it's awesome. I absolutely agree. It is a great spreadsheet. It's on the Bosqua website, and I will show the Bosqua website again at the end of this presentation. And I think we'll also be emailing out a list of resources at after this webinar. You want to kind of line the sides of your garden a little bit. So this is side slopes or vertical walls can be used in your garden design. If you're trying to go vertical, it's really good to use river rock or the crushed gravel to kind of support so that you don't have your native soil trying to fall back in to your rain garden. You want to keep that. And we already talked about building a berm at the bottom end so that you get that desired depth. So let's move on. I think the anatomy is pretty well covered here. For a quick overview, let's talk a little bit about plants. So let's talk about what plants we can put in our garden. So in your swale, so I just kind of picked my 4 or 5 favorites in each category. So in your sunken swale, Juncus common rush is a really wonderful California native. It grows really well in the Bay Area. It'll be hardy. It provides some native habitat. I find it very attractive. Other people have told me that they don't like the look of it. So in that case, wild lilac, scarlet monkeyflower, purple needlegrass, or California wild rose are all flowering plants that can definitely bush out a little bit and fill in your garden a little bit and just look really nice. On the raised berm, you can think about, maybe seeding in some California poppy. Bee plant, blue-eyed grass is one of my absolute favorites. I try to put that on the berms of most of my sites, and they've done really well for me, even on my hotter gardens. California fuchsia and coyote mint. Coyote mint can get a little bit weedy, but if you're okay with that, it is kind of fragrant, and I always like that. Douglas iris, creeping wild rye, gold currant, and yarrow are some of my favorites that are just super versatile. They do okay with the temporary ponding in the swale, but they don't mind being dry either. So things like the bee plant and the blue-eyed grass really don't like being flooded, so I would stick to having them on the berm rather than in the swale. So you want to make sure that whatever you're putting in the sunken swale is okay with a little bit of flooding when you have that temporary ponding in place. So that spreadsheet's going to have all the plants you can imagine wanting to know whether or not they can go in. It's going to categorize them for you. So that's a great resource. But what's not going to be on there, and what everybody always wants to know, is what about vegetables? Can I put vegetables in my rain garden? And the straightforward answer is no. You're not going to be able to put any edible plants in your rain garden, but on your berm, on the outside of your garden area, you can add vegetables. You can use your rain barrel to irrigate certain fruits and vegetables that are vining, things that are not sitting on the ground. So vining vegetables, things like tomato, cucumber, beans, peppers. Bushy berries like blueberry, blackberry, raspberry that are not on the ground. Tall, bushy herbs and vegetables like rosemary, artichoke that are not on the ground. Citrus trees. Other sorts of vegetable trees, pomegranate. Things that are not on the ground. Reoccurring theme here. So the ones you really want to avoid near your rain garden and you don't want to irrigate with your rain barrel are your leafy greens, your celery, your lettuce, your ground level berries, such as strawberries, blueberries sometimes. Blueberries, if they're the cultivated tall bushy blueberries, they're fine. But if they're the little, like the wild blueberries that grow right on the ground, you want to avoid them. Leafy herbs like basil and oregano that have higher uptake, and any root vegetables, anything that's actually growing in the ground. Like your carrots, your potatoes. Those are the ones that you really don't want to be using your rainwater for as much. There have been studies done. I've read some really interesting studies, especially out of Australia, where they use a lot of rainwater, that show that there is negligible amounts of pollution within these systems. But I don't recommend using any of these things using rainwater for any of these, because we have very different pollutants in the Bay Area than other areas. One of the main issues we have here that a lot of areas don't have are wildfires. So everyone will remember back in 2020, we had a couple of days where the sky was an unearthly orange, and we woke up to soot all over our vehicles and our driveway, and it was thick. So think about that soot is coming on your roofs and it's landing in your gutters and your roofs, and the next time it rains, it's getting flushed into your rain barrel system. The earth is incredible. The soil will filter that out, and the plants that are not directly in contact with that water are not going to draw those pollutants up into their roots, into their systems. But what we're worried about is those plants that are sitting on the ground, and when you use even those drip irrigation systems that come out and they get a little bit of, drops of water on the actual fruit, you don't want that wildfire pollution that has, you know, chemicals and houses and everything else horrible that's been caught in those fires getting into something you're going to eat. So that's my personal recommendation, not to include those. But for any rain garden, you're only going to think about veggies outside of the rain garden itself, on the berm, not in the garden. That's my little bit of a rant for today. So moving on, let's talk a little bit about maintenance. What does it take to maintain your rain garden? And rain gardens are actually a lot easier to maintain than your standard garden, because they hold the moisture a little bit longer, so your plants are happier a little bit longer. But you know, we do have a lot of dry months here in the Bay Area. And even when we get some weird rains in July and August, like we had this year, it was still pretty dry in between them. So you want to drip irrigate, or at least irrigate, but I recommend the drip irrigation. So especially when you're first planting your garden and you're trying to get those plants established, you know, we're coming into the planting season right now in California, so we really do want to plant, you know, October, November, December, January, and that would give the plants time to get established now before we get close to summer, when back into the dry season. But if you are planting new, and we don't have rain on the forecast, give those plants a little bit extra water and get them to grow up before they need to be able to handle that dry season. Just like any garden, you want to weed it as needed. You know, take a look at them, make sure everything looks good. If you're anything like me, you probably walk by your garden every day in one form or another. So glance over, see what's growing out there. And I do usually, when I'm coming in with the dog from a walk, I'll pick 3 or 4 weeds at a time, and then it never gets too overwhelming. Replace your mulch as needed. So your mulch layer on your berm, and if you decide to use mulch instead of rock in your garden itself, should be at least 2 to 3 inches thick. So if you are seeing dirt in between chunks of bark, and you're not just seeing chunks of bark, you know, head to your local garden supply center and get some more mulch and add some more on. You want that to be pretty thick. And we already talked about using a hardwood mulch if you're using it in the swale. If you're on the berm, I still recommend using a heavier mulch rather than the fiber mulch, or the micro bark, but you can get away with a little bit more on the berm than in the swale, because it's not going to have the same flooding. Keep an eye out for areas of erosion. You know, stabilize it like we talked about. Use the river rocks, and try to stabilize, especially where the water's coming into your system. But if you notice some erosion happening, you know, get a couple more cobbles, a couple more rubber blocks, and try to secure that before you have too much dirt flowing into your garden. Avoid synthetic fertilizers, herbicides. You know, those are going to add pollutants to the water, and you know, especially if you're doing native gardens, they are really happy with this amended soil. They're going to be happy to reach their roots down, you know, through all their gravel and into the native soil as well. And you know, they shouldn't need any sort of fertilizer or herbicides. There are natural fertilizers that you can use. You know, certain plants, you know, like a little more acidity, you can figure out what the plant likes and add some natural stuff. Also, going to your local transfer station to get some compost is a great way to add fertilization for your soil. Got a couple of questions here. Yes, I did say the rain garden should be 10 feet from the house. So when I'm talking about where the water is coming into the garden, usually you would run a pipe that 10 feet from your downspout into the garden. So what I'm talking about, the erosion happening, would be where that the extra extended 10-foot downspout drops into your garden. Maximum depth of a rain garden is a very interesting question. Um, I've never done one more than 24 inches deep. I can't imagine wanting to dig down or being able to dig down more than 24 inches deep. Every site that I've done here, getting past 18 inches was pretty tough because the soil gets pretty impacted and rocky. I honestly don't know if there is a maximum depth that you're allowed to do. I will look that up and see if we can include that in the follow-up email if I can find that out. But I can't imagine wanting to go more than 24 inches deep. For our last note before we head into the final question thing is check for extended ponding. So we talked about this earlier. This, you should absolutely not have any water in your garden for more than 3 days. All of your water should really drain within 1 day, but sometimes we get storms that last longer and it rains, fairly regularly over a couple days. So you may have slightly extended ponding. It should never last for more than 3 days. We worry about mosquitoes, we worry about other pests, but also most of these plants don't want to be sitting in a bog, and we just don't want that standing water. We want this to be able to drain. So if they're engineered correctly, they should drain. So with that, we've got about 20 minutes left for questions. So I'm gonna just leave this slide up for a few minutes. I'll answer any questions you guys want to type in, or if you want to raise your hand, we can unmute you and you can ask your question out loud. These are great resources. The Bosqua website, Flows to Bay, also covers all of San Mateo County. They are a great resource and also have the rebates listed on their website. Graywater Action is a local nonprofit that is a great resource for rainwater harvesting. They also do a lot of graywater, which graywater is very different than rainwater harvesting. Graywater is reusing gray wastewater from your house, specifically from your bathroom or your laundry room. And they have great resources for that as well. Valley Water also has some good resources you should check out. So I'm gonna take a look at these questions coming in. So we have a question if these slides will be shared. So all of these webinars will be posted usually within about a week on the Bosqua website. So if you go to the Bosqua website to their page for presentations, there's a link at the bottom that says check out our previous webinars, and all the videos are posted there through YouTube, I believe. So you can watch those at any time, including this one. Okay, well, looks like some people are already heading out. Thank you all for coming. Please keep asking questions. Are there volunteer opportunities for people to help install rain barrels in gardens? Yes. So a lot of these pictures that I showed in this presentation are actually volunteer installations. And so, for example, that Bull Park garden was installed. We think we had about 20 or 30 volunteers show up to do that one. And so we did a talk in the beginning where we talked about what we were doing and about rain gardens. Then we had everyone helping to do the installation. Flows to Bay often does some. They don't have any scheduled right now. I do believe there's going to be some coming up in East Palo Alto in the next couple of months, but I don't know of any that are happening in the near future. The presentation on October 7th will have a rain barrel and hopefully some soil samples so that you can kind of get a hands-on feel for what it would take to install a rain barrel, but we won't be installing it. We'll just be looking at the parts. So, but there are opportunities out there. Keep an eye out on these websites, these 4 websites, to see if any of them are hosting live installations coming up. Where do we get compost? So I get mine from the transfer station in Sunnyvale. I'm not sure in Redwood City where the compost station is.
We usually have a couple of times a year, generally around, we just had one, usually around the cleanups. You know, we do a fall and a spring cleanup. And the local garbage company will bring a huge container, and it's a come help yourself. You can get compost from them for free. Another organization or company that sells compost, it's very popular in the area, is Leanso. And yeah,
Leanso is also a great place to get your bioswale soil, as well as your drainage rock and cobbles. Their prices are very reasonable in the area. They do offer delivery. So if you are installing a new rain garden, I definitely recommend checking out their website.
and they do a lot of compost tea too. I know some people use that as a fertilizer. So
So I've got 2 more questions here. The first one is, are there companies that install rain gardens? And the answer is yes. If you go to the Flows to Bay website, they have a tab that is local installers. And I think they have that for both rain barrels and rain gardens. And I will say my name is on there. I am not an installer. I only work with nonprofits to help them with their installations. I do not install at private homes. But I could do a help you with a site visit and let you know what would be possible. I just don't do installations myself in private homes. There is a company in San Jose, Bay Maples, that does them, but depending on scale, I know they've been a little overwhelmed. So they're a little backlogged right now. And I think the Flows to Bay website has the most comprehensive list of installers. The next question I have is, can you connect multiple barrels in different locations of your house, front and back, versus daisy chaining right next to each other as pictured previously? So the basic answer is yes. I mean, all you have to do is run a pipe between them and you can connect them. The more practical answer is it worth it? So if you were connecting to 2 downspouts that are both on the back side of your house and you're putting the barrels in between them, so you're running pipe from both sides to connect in, it makes complete sense to do that, especially if your garden is in the back of the house. If you have your garden, we'll say on the north side of the house, and you have barrels on the east and west side, and you have your front door in between them, it may not make the most sense to try to run a pipe past your front door to get those systems connected. It might make more sense to run separate systems on either side. And you can run those separate systems and either connect them to irrigate the same area or use them to irrigate different locations. It's more a matter of practicality. I'm going to progress the slide now just to remind you guys what other workshops are coming up through BOSQA. And if anyone has questions that are too hard to type, just hit that little hand waving icon to raise your hand and we can unmute you so you can ask them verbally. Debbie, do you have any other questions or comments you'd like to share?
I don't, other than, like you said, taking a look at these other classes that are coming up. And then reviewing, there's a great library of videos that have already been recorded and are on the Bosca website. I don't know if any of you are from Redwood City, but if you are, we just replaced our website where customers can go in and view their water consumption. So that's always really helpful too. Although with a rain barrel system or rainwater harvesting, you're reducing that consumption, which is great. So you can go to our website, redwoodcity.org, and look for water conservation and get that information. But other than that, no, I don't really have anything else. Quick question. If you were to ask you were to go to Lingso and you wanted to get the soil that you said that goes on top of the rock, what kind of soil would you say that you wanted? What would you ask for?
It's actually called bioswale soil.
It really is. Okay.
It really is. And Linkso is the only distributor in the area that I've purchased it from. So I know they carry it, or they used to.
Okay.
And like I said, you can make your own bioswale soil. If your soil isn't too clayey, you can mix compost and sand with your natural soil to create your own bioswale soil, but Linkso sells it ready to go.
Gotcha. Okay. Great.
And if you want the drainage rock, what Linkso calls drainage rock is not what I recommend. It's what they call crushed gravel. So it's 3/4 to 1 inch crushed gravel. So that's a excellent question too, because I call it drainage rock here, but I've accidentally purchased what Linkso calls drainage rock, and I do not recommend it. It compacts too much. So crushed gravel is better.
Gotcha. Yeah, there's it. Where I live, the local place that we usually go to is the Soils Farm, and I've ordered rock before, and I had no idea there was so many options for rock. So that's really helpful.
Absolutely. And what I call river rock is Linkso calls it, I believe, 2 to 4 inch cobble.
Ah, gotcha.
But you can also go to Linkso and drive through or go into their building, and they have little box samples of all their different rocks. So you can choose what you find most aesthetically pleasing. I really like the large cobbles because to me they feel like a creek bed back home. I'm from northern New York, where we have a lot of water and a lot of rocks. So to me that feels like a more natural creek bed, but I've gone, in with my husband or with other people, and they felt like that was not the right aesthetic for them for their landscaping, and there was a different rock that appealed to them more. So as far as the rock goes, whatever you're putting on top, rock or mulch, it really is whatever you want, because you're going to be looking at it every day. This is on your property. It doesn't matter what I think is pretty. But for the bioswale soil, that's important. You're not going to see it, but the function is what matters.
Gotcha. Thank you. All right. Well, it looks like we don't have any other questions. So I think we're ready to call it a night. And I really appreciate all of you that attended and spent the time to find out about these rain gardens and rainwater harvesting. All right. Well, have a good night, everyone. Thank you. And thank you so much, Chris.
Absolutely. Thank you. Have a great night.
You too. Bye-bye.